If you want to know the role of the Department of Justice under President Trump, just listen to his words. He said, "I have the absolute right to do what I want to do with the Justice Department." End of quote. He not only uses the Justice Department to advance his political interest, but he's also promised to seek, quote, retribution against, quote, the enemy within. The president has repeatedly threatened to weaponize the justice system against those he feels have wronged him, and that's a long list. It includes career prosecutors, military officials, and his own former political appointees. Unfortunately, we are seeing these threats emerge in real time. Last week, the Trump administration reassigned and removed at least 20 senior career National Security Division and Criminal Division attorneys, including one prosecutor who had served in the National Security Division since its inception under George W. Bush. President Trump also forced out both FBI Director Christopher Wray and Deputy Director Paul Abate, creating a leadership vacuum in that important agency. These moves, clearly made in the interest of installing his own loyalists, put our national security and public safety at risk. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia is further proof of President Trump's commitment to putting his interests ahead of those of the American people. Last week, he installed Ed Martin as interim U.S. Attorney here in Washington, D.C. Mr. Martin was a leader of the so-called Stop the Steal movement to overturn the 2020 election, and Mr. Martin defended several January 6 rioters. Mr. Martin was on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol on January 6. He posted the following on social media, and I quote, "Like Mardi Gras in D.C. today, love, faith, and joy. Ignore fake news." End of quote. Mr. Martin has already dismissed all pending charges against January 6 defendants, shut down the section of the office that was handling those cases. He's opened an investigation into the office's January 6 prosecutions, apparently to begin carrying out Pam Bondi's promise to, quote, prosecute the prosecutors, investigate the investigators. In a related development yesterday, Acting Attorney General James McHenry moved to fire a number of career Justice Department employees because, quote, you played a significant role in prosecuting President Trump, end of quote. Retaliating against these career public officials who were simply doing the job they were assigned is patently unfair. Asked repeatedly who will execute the mass deportation effort, we have finally come to learn which agencies will bear that responsibility. They include the Drug Enforcement Administration, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and other Justice Department law enforcement agencies. Now, instead of investigating fentanyl and the firearms trafficking to Mexico to the cartels, DEA and ATF resources will be diverted toward deporting families who may or may not have any criminal record or be any danger to this country. And in the latest blow, President Trump's illegal funding freeze jeopardizes critical Justice Department grants that support local law enforcement and survivors of domestic violence, sex trafficking, and other violent crimes. Given the massive upheaval that President Trump has caused at the Justice Department in just the first few days in office, the next Attorney General will have their work cut out for them. As I said during Ms. Bondi's hearing, it is absolutely critical that any nominee for the position be committed first and foremost to the Constitution and the American people, not the president and his political agenda. Unfortunately, I'm unconvinced that Ms. Bondi shares my belief. She is one of 4 personal lawyers of President Trump that is already already selected for top positions at the Department of Justice. And she has echoed President Trump's calls for exacting revenge on political opponents. Ms. Bondi undermined our democracy by joining President Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. It appears she does not regret that decision, as she refused before this committee repeatedly during her hearing to acknowledge that President Trump actually lost the vote in 2020. During her hearing, I asked if she was familiar with the January 2021 phone call in which President Trump called on a Republican Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, quote, to find 11,780 votes. Ms. Bondi denied ever having listened to the phone call. However, in August of 2023, she appeared on a news program and defended President Trump's conduct with Raffensperger. She stated that his actions were, quote, not a crime and were instead, quote, free speech. She condemned the criminal charges that had been filed against President Trump due to his conduct on that call where he asked the Georgia Secretary of State, quote, to find 11,780 votes. I asked Ms. Bondi to explain why she spoke so authoritatively on the legal strength of the case when she was, according to her own claim before this committee, unfamiliar with the evidence. Her explanation that she was on television, not in a court, is deeply concerning that someone seeking the role of Attorney General believes it's appropriate to comment publicly on a criminal case without conducting even a minimal assessment of the evidence. The role of Attorney General is a serious one. It requires a person be committed to facts and the law, not someone who is willing to say whatever is politically expedient. During Ms. Bondi's hearing, I was surprised to hear her speak of a, quote, peaceful transition of power in 2021. In written questions, Ms. Bondi attempted to walk that statement back, instead referring to, quote, a smooth transition of power. I was in the Capitol building on January 6, 2021. The events of that day were neither peaceful nor smooth. You don't have to take my word for it. The 140 law enforcement officers who were assaulted by President Trump's supporters on January 6 can attest to what actually happened. Ms. Bondi also refused to comment on possible pardons for January 6 rioters who violently assaulted police officers. One of my Republican friends on this panel dismissed my question on the subject and said it was, quote, an absurd and unfair hypothetical to even ask whether President Trump was going to grant pardons to those who assaulted police officers. Now we know what happened. I also remain concerned about Ms. Bondi's deep ties to special interest. Her lobbying clients included an array of large corporations, Amazon, Uber, and a private prison company, Geo Group, along with the government of Qatar. Ms. Bondi has earned over $1 million as a lobbyist and hundreds of thousands more for providing legal services to major corporations. But Ms. Bondi notably did not recognize these entities as potential conflicts of interest as she's confirmed. That's why I asked the Justice Department and the National Archives for more information on her lobbying before the Trump White House and her foreign lobbying activities. We have yet to receive that information. And when asked to commit to recusing herself from matters involving her former clients, Ms. Bondi would only commit to consulting with DOJ ethics officials. The next Attorney General needs to enforce our antitrust laws and protect American consumers, not favor corporate giants. I went into Ms. Bondi's hearing with an open mind for obvious reasons. Yes, she was the Attorney General for the third largest state in the Union for 10 years. But there remains one question basically unanswered, whether she'd be willing to tell Donald Trump, President of the United States, and wealthy special interests no if faced with pressure to use her position as Attorney General to benefit those parties. In light of the Trump administration's actions over the course of the past few days, that question is even more critical, and I did not receive a satisfactory answer from Ms. Bondi. Since Watergate, there's been a bipartisan support for the idea that the Justice Department must be independent from the White House. President Trump's conduct during his first term underscored that need. I do not believe that Ms. Bondi will provide it. I hope she proves me wrong, but I cannot support her nomination.